This is the unrestricted free agent.
The Jimbo Fisher stuff. Were you in the room the other day when he threw?
I was. Part of the reason we had so much fun being Clemson was because we used to talk a lot of shit to them and they couldn't handle it.
You feel fine, but your hands are shaking.
Coach Spurrier couldn't give a damn.
I want to take these athletes and mentor them.
Why can't the Gamecocks win at the SEC tournament?
So sunny all the time, so hot.
Too sunny.
Too sunny.
Fans are going to be fans, and people who understand the sport are going to talk sports.
With some weird dynamics.
It's going to be painful, but I think at the end of the day, we'll be stronger people for it.
Another microphone ready to go. Good morning. Welcome in. Hope your 4th of July weekend went well. We're off to a flying start. July 5th, 2022. Tim Hill, unrestricted free agent. Glad you're part of the program. Let's see who was in first this morning. CCN on the YouTube live stream. Up and rolling. Live video stream, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. After the day off yesterday, the great American holiday that was the 4th of July, with the hero of our country, Joey Chestnut. Not only does he, what was it, 16th straight hot dog eating contest, the Nathans every single year, whatever it is, does it on crutches, and then takes out a guy who, I don't know what was going on there. Jumped on the stage, had some kind of weird sign. It was amazing video, for sure. Just mowing down hot dogs, taking guys out in the chokehold, keeps mowing down hot dogs, and continues on. And you can't make that stuff up, man. You just can't do it. Unfortunately, on the opposite end of the spectrum as well, tragedy in Chicago. Absolutely awful. Don't even know what to say about that. From the sports perspective, Gamecock football recruiting, plenty of news since we last spoke. Was it 3 guys? I think in all 3 4-stars, depending on, I think, where you look. But it was the quarterback, Dante Reno, really, I guess maybe the headliner in this group. I'm not sure. He's the first 2024 guy. He did it on national television. I think it was Saturday night, right? Son of the Yale coach, Tony Reno. But from Massachusetts and Connecticut, way up there. I think Yale's not in Jersey, is it? That's Princeton. Yeah, so they're all kind of the same to me up there. But making headlines there, it was a bit of a surprise with the running back joining the Gamecocks recruiting class, and a pretty highly touted running back, and Dontavius Braswell from Washington County, Georgia. Got the numbers on him, 16th running back in the country. I think maybe second highest in the class of 2023, behind only Pup Howard. Jaden Robinson, a 4-star linebacker from Lake City, Florida. So some movement for sure for the Gamecocks. Troy says, I had hot dogs for lunch yesterday, but only 2. Yeah, man. Ooh. My 9-year-old had 3 the other day. I was worried about him. He housed him, though. He was good. It was in a reasonable amount of time as well. Didn't get crazy on it. July 4th for me was a little parade right around my town. The Tiga K 4th of July celebration is a big one up near Fort Mill, Charlotte area. That's where I'm at. And the 7 and 8-year-old all-star team in the little parade and hanging out with those guys. That was fun in the morning. But that also included free candy for the kids, and that included meltdowns for the rest of the day. But made it to fireworks. The 2-year-old tried to make it to fireworks last night. Didn't quite get that far, fortunately for everybody. 7 and 9-year-old were pleased with the fireworks, and we're good to go. So certainly back and have a great appreciation for everything yesterday represented. Unfortunately, we got to start with both ends of the spectrum there. The hot dog eating contest with Joey Chestnut and that situation, and then tragedy in Chicago, absolutely awful. Another mass shooting, and that conversation just continues in our country, and unfortunately, so did the awful examples of tragedy there. But again, from the sporting perspective, as I see it, as I sit here, Gamecock recruiting, again, not a ton of national movement, 26th in the country, 7th in the SEC, and a bunch of other schools with movement over the weekend, a busy period for commits, even though it's technically a dead period, right? This is coming off a busy June where a bunch of people made official visits. Nearly every single program ramps things up at the end of June and has a cookout or their signature recruiting event, making sure everybody's in town and putting pieces in place, having everybody set to go, and then they do it kind of at their own individual times. Wanted to give a few more numbers. I believe it's 13 where the Gamecocks are at. Yep, as I look on the on3.com team rankings consensus-wise, where they're trying to take in all the services. And that's the one that I use just because I think it might have the most information 24/7. I'm sure has a really good composite as well. But 13 commits now, just compared to the team right in front of them is Northwestern at 25th in the country. They got 20. At 23rd in the country is Florida State. They only have 9. I would say 13 right now, a little bit on the lower end. Texas A&M, though, only has 5, and they're at 28. So, again, this is always take it for what it's worth. Notre Dame has moved to number 1, I think, relatively recently over Ohio State. They have 19 guys committed. Texas at number 3, they've got 18. Alabama's at 4, they got 10. Georgia at 5 with 12. And Clemson at 6 with 16. So you can always take these things for what they're worth. What it means for the Gamecocks specifically is you already are ahead of the game, I think, in 2024. It shows that you got a coaching staff in place. You've got a plan moving forward, a kind of master plan, a much more solid foundation than has been in place in the last several years at the end of the Will Muschamp era. Then Shane Beamer had to pick things up, brand new staff, brand new head coach, a lot to prove out there. And you already have a solid guy, I think is how I read the Dante Reno commitment. Again, this kid is going into his junior year of high school. So it's really early on in the process. I think ranked number right around 18th is what I saw, number 17 in the country from a quarterback perspective. So pretty highly thought of. Not an maybe overwhelming 5-star kind of guy. But again, so early on in the process, will be interesting to see if this continues to be a bit of a trend, taking especially a quarterback as early as they've done now, the Gamecocks. And it will be building now the 2024 class around him. It's that running back commit was a bit of a surprise for Carolina. Not a bit of a surprise. I think Nebraska, the odds-on favorite to grab him from what I saw on 3. They kind of guess with the maybe top 5 commitments or the most serious commitments that are out there, most serious offers that are out there, I should say. And the Gamecocks were down at like 19% chance to get him, something like that. Nebraska, the highest one at 30. It was Louisville, Boston College, Florida State, all kind of in the mix. So that was interesting for sure. And that is Jaden Robinson, the 4-star linebacker from Lake City, Florida. I think he's the 4th highest rated now commit to this 2023 class. Adding or maybe headlining things for the Gamecocks from a linebacker perspective, where it has been a massive position of need in the last several years. Ernest Jones, good player, no doubt about it. I think most Gamecock fans pretty surprised by the instant success Jones has had with the Rams. A little bit surprised that Jones went to the NFL as early as he did, got drafted as high as he did, and now has had as much success as he did. Maybe it had to do with exactly how Will Muschamp ran his defense and how Jones wasn't a star in college. Very simple, but has been really good so far in his NFL career for sure. I think Gamecock fans in general, and you guys feel free to chime in. That's what I love about this show, the live interaction, even if you're listening to this thing later. The live interaction from the 8 to 10 period is always the most entertaining part for me, for sure, to hear what your perspective is on things and to see where it kind of matches up with mine, if it does at all. And it's okay if it doesn't, for sure. But I think it was my 9-year-old showed me a card. They're all into their sports cards these days, and had some kind of had in their head. I think they had like an opening of their own little shop from their closet, but I thought they had already opened it before. So I don't know if it was a reopening, a grand open. I don't know what was going on exactly. They're better marketers than I am to begin with. But the 9-year-old showed me a card, Jasper Brinkley, with the Minnesota Vikings. I know our buddy Jason Cameron is a big Vikings fan. He asked me how much he should sell it for, and I said, well, maybe not so much. He's a really good college player, hasn't had a star NFL career. But from a linebacking perspective, Sky Moore was really good for several years at the end of the Steve Spurrier era, and then came back to start the Will Muschamp era, I thought, and then headed off to the NFL. I forget how that ended up going on. It was a weird deal for sure. There was an injury involved at the end of the Spurrier era. I know Will Muschamp recruited him back, and maybe it was 1 year with Muschamp. And to my knowledge, and my memory wants to tell me it was a relatively underwhelming year, but I forget how that ended. And then didn't even get drafted and has had a bit of an NFL career. I'm just trying to go back to the mental Rolodex and go the linebacker position specifically. And yeah, I know Jadeveon Clowney is listed as an outside linebacker in the NFL, but in my head, and for our conversation, for our purposes here on this show, defensive end for sure. Especially in college, I put Clowney with John Abraham, the most dominant position South Carolina's had in my lifetime. Wide receiver pops up there in my head, maybe a little deeper for sure. Defensive back has been excellent through the years, but linebacker has not. It just hasn't. And if Clayton White, the defensive coordinator, who I thought did, I think it's nearly impossible to argue, didn't do a tremendous job in his first season with Shane Beamer and company. The numbers defensively, it was like 100 plus in yards per play, I think, for the Gamecock defense at the end of the Muschamp era. And then in year one, under Shane Beamer and Clayton White, specifically running the defense, it improved to mid 40s, I think, if we're just looking from a numbers perspective. But it wasn't just that. It was how competitive, how solid most of the time, most of the season, the Gamecock defense was, and how that was the opposite. That was definitely not that the year before. There was a lot of work to do on the defensive side of the ball. Carolina still got a long way to go, no doubt about it. You got to be so talented and deep, especially defensively in the SEC. We've seen it through the years. It's what Steve Spurrier did the best, stacking good players on top of good players and having difference makers as well. But it's such a difficult thing to do when you're just when I see it as kind of starting from scratch from a recruiting standpoint. Like, all right, here are the guys. Let's go get some. Here's what we need more than others, maybe. Linebacker towards the top of the list, I think, for the Gamecocks. And it looks like from a paper perspective, they've solved that and then maybe elevated things for sure. A couple of guys already on campus. Stone Blanton is the name that sticks out to me. I've seen his golf social media videos. Going to be a freshman this year for Carolina. Came in, 4-star guy, highly touted. And then a couple of guys now in the class with Pup Howard and Jaden Robinson. So linebacker seems to be a large upgrade for South Carolina. That's what I got over the weekend. You got the headliner and a quarterback leading the class of 2024. How these guys kind of run their own recruiting, both as players. Jaheim Bell, I know, was pretty active on social media over the weekend. Pleased with his recruiting record. I think a couple of these guys might have been in on official visits, and he might have been their host. He was their host and has a I think undefeated record is what he was letting us know about. That happens a lot too, right? The best players on the field can certainly be your best recruiters. And if guys have good numbers from a stat perspective, then they're not afraid to translate that away from the field a little bit. Jason, no problem on the shout out there. Go Vikings, he wants to say this morning. And Roger weighing in with a good morning as well. Always a sunny outlook for Roger to begin with. So July off to a good start from a Gamecock football perspective. From a broader perspective, we've had a little bit more time to sit with that Big Ten news, right? A lot more conversations out there. Nothing newsworthy happening that we know of since the major news announced last week. But have you evolved your feelings on it, I guess is my question, your perspective on things? Because to me, it was such a shock, a surprise, so out of left field to begin with. I think the longer I've had to think about it, the more conversations I've had with others and getting their feelings as well, the more I'm left kind of shaking my head and uncertain just about how college football is going to look in certainly 5-10 years down the line. And not sure if we're headed in the right direction, unfortunately. And even as I say that, I go back and I always go back to voting for a national champion and how ridiculous that was and how foreign a concept that seems now with the college football playoff having been intact for as long as it has. The BCS, how imperfect that was, but at least seemingly a better move. So that's kind of where my brain goes to the national championship part of things. But that's not obviously what college football is. If it was, we wouldn't be sitting here talking. The South Carolina football conversation hasn't been involved in the national championship in my lifetime. Maybe, 1984, maybe, right? You get, and then we don't want to bring up all the Navy and that stuff, but you go 8-9-0, whatever it was. You're number 2 in the country. It was part of the conversation back in 1984. I was 6, so I wasn't having a lot of those conversations, at least that I remember in kindergarten. I probably was, just don't remember it. Wasn't quite the same thing in 1984 as we sit here, a lot of years later. But UCLA and Southern Cal to the Big Ten in a couple of years. The 16-team super conference kind of deal that we're on, or do we even call those super conferences yet? What number does it have to get to in college sports to be a super conference, right? Because I'll fast forward to the 95, South Carolina goes to the SEC, and even a 12-team conference at that point was a massive conference. It was the biggest. I think this was pre-Big 12, if I'm not mistaken. You had the Big 8 for a while. You had the SEC had yet to break up in divisions and had to do that when South Carolina comes in. And now we've gone to 16, or we will go to 16, we know of, in both the SEC and the Big Ten. 32 teams combined. The question becomes, all right, are those super conferences going to continue just to pluck other schools out there? Who would it be if they do? I don't know, man. And then do you have to then break them back down into divisions? And then do we get basically versions of old conferences that we saw now just under the umbrella of a different conference? And do we get similar type rivalries and we just maybe end things a little different? I don't know. But I mean, a seismic shift in just the way that I think about sports, the way that we know college football will be structured differently moving forward, and a lot of collateral damage. Feel like I knew there was that similar situation last year, but with just Oklahoma and Texas doing it, and the Big 12 having been not irrelevant, but pretty close from a conference standpoint. They were clearly not neck and neck with the SEC and the Big 10, and even maybe the ACC from a conference strength standpoint. So last year's news was massive for sure. Never saw Oklahoma and Texas coming to the SEC. I think if you tell me you did, I'm not going to believe you. You better have some solid reasoning behind that. Because, I mean, just what they represent. I lived in Texas for a few years, and everything's bigger in Texas is the same, right? I can confirm. And what Texas thinks about itself, I've never heard anything otherwise than, yep. I've only heard stories to make me think, wow, even more. What Stuart Lake told us, the former Gamecock football assistant, it was when he was at Ole Miss, proud national champions now. This was 03-ish, maybe to 05-ish, somewhere in there. That Texas had a problem with the typical hotel that teams would stay out when they come to play in Oxford. So I think they had to stay up maybe all the way in Memphis, or they stayed out because they had to have accommodations that suited them, that were up to their standards. Like that's some next level stuff there. Texas. So never saw Texas and Oklahoma coming. Yet it just was a signal of the SEC's strength and Greg Sankey's position and forward thinking and the whole thing. But if you would have told me that two notable college football programs, two notable college athletic programs were going to join the Big Ten this summer, man, I wonder how far Southern Cal and UCLA would have been down on my list. Really, really far. And then Texas and Oklahoma, I would not have paired to jump ship together. And I wouldn't have put Southern Cal and UCLA. I probably would have put like Southern Cal with maybe Oregon if I had to pick two from the Pac-12. Maybe Stanford. I don't know. But I just wouldn't have thought that two teams from the same city would make a lot of sense from a conference standpoint, or that they would join forces. But I guess that's just the new format, right? You pick a partner and do-si-do all over to a big-time conference and shove money in your pockets on the way out. So how that's all going to shake out, have no idea what the word, what I've been reading is Notre Dame now certainly being courted hard by the Big Ten. See, I just don't know how to even process the secondary information, because we never got rumblings of the massive news. The Texas and Oklahoma thing didn't linger. I think it was about the same shelf life as the Southern Cal UCLA thing. As we started to hear reports or rumors, speculation, it was almost already done in an amazingly short period of time. So the more and more I think about it, maybe the less and less I like it from an old school tradition standpoint, obviously. But the more intriguing it gets at the same time. Like I don't want to be that guy stuck in the past and saying, "Oh, well, kids these days and back in the day is so much better," and the whole thing. Again, more good college football games, I'm all for. But what kind of collateral damage, what kind of stuff comes along with that? Maybe even unintended consequences. It doesn't really matter, intended or not. There's going to be a lot of stuff that comes along with the new college football world order that includes Southern Cal and UCLA at the Big Ten and Texas and Oklahoma in the SEC. But that's my little rant this morning, coming off of a 4th of July weekend, extended weekend. The Monday is the day to have the holiday, right? I don't know. Would you vote Friday or Monday? I guess I would probably vote Friday, but then you just jump right into it. I love kind of the buildup that we had to this, to the actual 4th. You got to have some preliminaries. Got to warm it up and get there, build up to the whole celebration. But then I don't like the turning around and, all right, boom, you're into the week. Troy says tradition has been kicked out the door. But that's not a recent thing, right? I mean, for the most part, tradition has been gone a long time. Texas A&M's been in the SEC for a while. Missouri's been in the SEC now for a while. And not everybody comes at it from the same place, right? I'm thinking, Virginia Tech and Miami jumping to the Big East or joining the Big East was seismic news back in the day. All right, you're taking Tuesday off to recover. That's the best way to do it, Jason, for sure. If you have the Monday holiday, take Tuesday off to recover, for sure. So make it a 5-day weekend celebration, pretty much. Smart. I agree. That's a great way to do it. But the tradition, okay, what are we talking about exactly? I mean, still the main rivalries across the board in college football, I think, they're so valuable that they're going to remain in place. I guess it's that, okay, you're playing the game and you think you're doing it for tradition's sake, and it then becomes so valuable. Then to rip some of those away, like I'm sure Stanford, Cal, Oregon, Washington feel completely gypped in this thing, right? I get that. Everybody in the Big 12, Texas Tech and Oklahoma State, notably, who pops out in my head, like, all right. But I don't know if those guys ever considered themselves, maybe they did consider themselves equals, or they just loved the tradition part of it. I don't know. But it also it paves the way for new traditions and new rivalries without the, I never thought in my lifetime South Carolina and Missouri would be a thing, that they would even play each other, much less have some interesting games and relationships and fan bases not really like each other. Chris weighing in on the Facebook live stream. Goes with a Go Cox and a Spurs up sign there. Good to see you, Chris. Roger says, I'm like you. I can't believe in this day and age how quiet they ended up keeping this news, talking about Texas and Oklahoma, the SEC, UCLA, and Southern Cal. Goes to show you people in positions of power still have the ability to keep things quiet for sure. But, man, from the college football perspective, just the college sports perspective, can you imagine getting that news and saying, hey, this is going down? I would love to know, we'll probably never know, exactly how many people were involved in this thing. It makes me think, because these massive jumps in conference, this massive switch, very similar with Texas and Oklahoma and then Southern Cal and UCLA, it makes me think the number had to be so small. I mean, it had to be athletic directors and a very few trusted select people in that athletic department. People at ESPN and Fox, clearly, who are, I've read the articles and seen the snide remarks. That's who's driving the expansion. I forget who popped it out first, but it's been a while. It's been around for a while. I think it might have been a coach, or might have been an anonymous coach that threw it out there. Eventually you're going to have ESPN conference versus Fox conference, and that's what's driving a lot of this. There's no doubt about it. So you got everybody that's involved in it from that perspective, it's their job to keep their mouths shut. Like, that's just what it is. But then when you get the athletic departments involved, that's the impressive part to me, that's been able to stay quiet. Troy says, all I have known in my life for Clemson is the ACC. Now I have to face the reality that there may not be an ACC. Yeah, I almost giggle when I say that, just to read that and say it out loud. But it's true. It's where we are. I'm sure it's a massive concern for the ACC office. And we talked about it when the news first came down, how the ACC seemed to be the organization out there hurt most by this. Maybe you could argue those other Pac-12 schools that I mentioned, Oregon, Washington, Stanford. Chris asks, how many teams do they have in a conference now? Are they finally going to change the name of the conference? Can't be the Big Ten anymore. Well, the Big 12 has done it for a long time. I mean, the Big Ten has had 14 now for a little while. So I don't know. That's another great point. We just go to like an NFC, AFC type deal. See, I didn't live through that AFL period. Maybe some who are more experienced can talk about that pre-Super Bowl even. I know that's going way back, but it's when there was the AFL, there was the NFL. And they kind of coexisted, and eventually they merged. Do we get a similar type situation now in football where the American League and the National League, you're one or the other? You know, Troy, I never thought in my life, growing up being a Braves guy, growing up being an anti-DH, more baseball traditionalist. No, that's how baseball should be played, right? Grew up watching National League games, 7:05 on TBS, most of them. That's the way the game should be played. National League teams don't play American League teams. The All-Star game is great. You get to see the game stars playing against each other. Baseball has the best format for an All-Star game because I couldn't tell that everyone wasn't giving it their all, except that the pitchers got pulled really quickly. It still seemed like a legit game that my favorite players were trying to win, and they were playing against guys that I rarely saw outside of the playoffs, but heard about. I rarely saw play against those other guys outside of the World Series. The one time you could do it. But then how baseball evolved, and you get interleague play now, and it's just nobody bats an eye. It's what it is. And maybe if you're a massive baseball traditionalist, which I don't consider myself, that you're still shaking your fist at the clouds and angry, but I think by and large it's gone really, really well. It's been a good thing for Major League Baseball to get interleague play, to not have you can only play in this league, and the only way you're ever going to see a team from another league is if you make it to the World Series. But the original question Chris pops out there: how many teams do they have in the conference now? He's talking about the Big Ten specifically, but my question is, where does conference expansion stop? How many teams is too many? How many teams have we already gotten to that tipping point? Is 16 the tipping point where the Power Five will just not be the Power Five anymore? Because we've already seen the Big 12 make their adjustments and go out and replace 2 teams leaving with 4 teams coming in, and certainly not the brands, the history, the perennial powerhouses that are leaving, but they did what they had to do to survive. Now, what about the Pac-12? They do the same thing. How long can that model survive? We're just waiting for 2 massive ACC teams to pull what Texas and Oklahoma and UCLA and Southern Cal have done? or are they pretty separate? What are the lawyers telling them about the grant of rights, of media rights that is signed up in the ACC through 2036? So all this stuff, all these questions still out there for sure. And I don't know how much stock I put into reports now about Oregon and Washington have contacted the Big Ten, but they've been told that Big Ten's still waiting on Notre Dame. And I don't know, because virtually no news got out until this thing was a done deal. Texas and Oklahoma and Southern Cal and UCLA. So if the next wave is going to happen, how much news is even going to slip out about that? Troy, I like standing firm. Still don't like the DH in interleague play. Good for you. Standing firm. I'm okay with it. And having watched the National League in the COVID shortened season go to the DH, I'm a fan of it. And knowing every other baseball organization in the world has a designated hitter outside of the old National League, it's more of a fun game. It's a different game, and baseball policing itself is different with the pitcher doesn't have to pick up the bat. So from that standpoint, I'm with you, Troy. But I'm like everybody else, man. I like home runs. I like more runs scored. I like the idea of guys getting older, having the opportunity to extend their careers as DHs. I think it's just better. Makes it more fun to watch when you don't have to pretty much just assume an out there in that one spot of the lineup, or just always bunt a guy or whatever it is. Now, the managing part, that's what I always loved from a baseball nerd perspective. The way Bobby Cox would always double shift or double switch guys. Everything that was involved from a strategy standpoint, so much better when a pitcher has to hit. I think everybody would agree with that. It's just, all right, what about the actual product? You like seeing guys, big, strong guys hit ball far? Well, the DH is all about that. How about that wandering route for a meandering, lukewarm take on what started with Gamecock recruiting? And again, positive news. More 4-star guys signing up with Carolina. A running back out of the state of Georgia, linebacker from the state of Florida, quarterback for next year's class from up north, son of the Yale football coach, which is a really interesting, I think, recruiting note for Dante Reno. And then I think very promising for the class of 2024 in multiple ways. First of all, the kid's a really good player, and that's the main thing. I think rated in the high teens as far as quarterbacks in the country. Keep in mind, going into a junior season of high school. So how much that means right now. And again, that's where I always shake my head with recruiting. When you're talking about guys who have played, who are going into their junior years of high school and already committing, man, that is a timeline that seems so sped up to me. That seems so foreign, alien. Especially when you have guys, the other guys we're talking about, making decisions now in July ahead of their senior year of high school. I get that for sure. And that's a much more traditional timeline. Don't want to necessarily have it hanging over your head during football season. And from a prospect perspective, very few guys burst on the scene their senior years from a major college standpoint. There are some, but it's definitely the exception. So you want to wrap up your spot. You want to have all that stuff kind of behind you. I get it. Most high school football players these days, or certainly a lot of them, want to graduate in December and go ahead and hop on campus and get spring football under your belt, get your college academic career started before that first football season comes along. But to commit before even you play a snap of your junior year in high school, that takes a different kind of kid, I think. And that's certainly what you want in a lot of ways. With the transfer portal, though, and the NIL issues still as much up in the air as they are, I don't know if you want it as much in 2022 as you have in the past as a big-time college football coach, but that's what Carolina has for sure. And I think they're going to play it to their advantage. How about this? Troy going with the greatest regular season game ever. Braves Mets, July of '85 would not have happened if pitchers didn't bat. Well, that would have been against the rules at the time for sure. I'm going to have to go back and check my history for that game. Maybe Troy can give us the history lesson as well. Greatest regular season game ever. It's an interesting headline there, or interesting designation, I guess is the best way to put that. And speaking of the Braves, let me give you a little update for them. They beat the Cardinals 6-3 last night. Got some notes here about where Atlanta sits now, 3.5 back of the New York Mets. Still got a way, so technically halfway through Major League Baseball season for Atlanta. Played their 81st game last night, 47-34, 13 games over 500 at the midway point. And the midway point, typically when you have the midseason classic, right? But I think the way baseball's been doing it, if not forever, certainly in the last few years, is kind of backloading or front-loading the season, right? Having mathematically more games before the All-Star break. That's happening again. It'll be 2 weeks from today, Home Run Derby for ahead of the Major League Baseball All-Star game. It's 2 weeks. Actually, it's 2 weeks from today. That is the All-Star game. I was thinking it was Monday because of the holiday. It is Tuesday today. 2 weeks from today is the All-Star game. So you still got a bunch more games coming, at least 10 more or so. So it's not exactly split half and half with the All-Star break in the middle. But technically the Braves halfway through, and man, what a June. What's the final numbers there? 21-6? Yeah, 21-6 in June. And Dansby Swanson deserves a bunch of credit. Was hitting 236 on May 23rd. Now he's got his average above 300, 304. Big night last night. A 3-run double in the second inning. Gets the headlines, helping the Braves beat the Cardinals 6-3. I think he ended up like 3 for 4, 2 for 3, something like that. And I didn't realize this. Did you guys know this? And I mean, you got to be a super nerd to have known this before the last several weeks. I don't care typically who players have as agents. I don't get involved in that. That's the business side of sports that I couldn't care much less for most of the time. Most of the time it's pretty irrelevant, just details that don't impact me as a fan, impact things on the field in a meaningful way. And I understand, like, you got to watch how much teams are going to invest in baseball, especially small market teams versus big market teams. It is a big deal. I guess I kind of see it like recruiting, right? It is important for sure. College sports, you can't have any kind of team without succeeding in recruiting. It's just there's so many things that go into it, and it's just not the most fun part of sports for me, for sure. But I mentioned the agent stuff because of the Freddie Freeman situation that has played out kind of before our eyes, where we saw Freddie come back, and that was emotional, man. That was tough to watch. And eventually it came out that one of the reasons, or one of the factors that was going on during the weekend, his first weekend back in Atlanta, was more conversation with the Braves, and basically Freddie figuring out that his agent didn't even tell him about the last offer that Atlanta had put out there. And so now I guess it's still a fluid situation technically, but the reports are Freddie firing his agent. Casey Close, I believe, was the guy's name for Excel Sports Management. I bring up the names because that's who Dansby Swanson has as well. And Dansby Swanson's in the last year of his contract. So something to keep an eye on for sure. But he's making himself a ton of money right now. Sitting at 28 years old, coming off career highs in home runs and RBI last year, helping the Braves win the World Series. And now having that tear, be leading the way for the Braves back to relevancy now, 3.5 games back of the Mets. I think still top handful of records, if not in the big leagues and certainly in the National League. 13 games above 500 now in the midway point. Oh, last night was a late night too. I don't know if you stayed up for it. 11:29, I think, is when they resumed the 5th inning after a long rain delay, more than 2.5 hours. So that's where the Braves sit now, midway through the season. Troy backing up that greatest regular season game ever with the Braves and the Mets. Rick Camp with a pinch hit 3-run homer to tie the game in the bottom of the 17th. Roger remembers that. First career hit for Camp at like 3 a.m. to tie the game with 2 outs. And he only hit because they're out of pinch hitters. Oh, awesome. Got it. Yeah, and those are the kind of things that make baseball unique for sure. But it was always tough to watch for the most part. But also maybe a reminder of how really, really good major league hitters were, and then how silly opposing pitchers would look, and how easy they'd get diced up most of the time. How rare you'd get a guy like Tom Glavine, or I'm trying to think of other good hitting pitchers. Obviously, Shohei Ohtani is just in a league of his own right now. It was always Glavine. Steve Avery was pretty decent, I think. Smoltz and Maddox were okay, and they always had a pretty strong reputation as pitchers who certainly didn't embarrass themselves at the plate and gave their team an advantage by being more competitive than others. But you get guys like Bartolo Colon, for instance, who just goes up there. It's like, what are we even watching now? Nice. Troy says, I'd come home from a party. First thought it was the old replay on TBS, then realized it was live. Good stuff. I'm guessing that might have happened for some people last night, coming home from fireworks and seeing the Braves game not even on until 11:30-ish, resuming in the 5th inning late last night. But the holiday weekend, good from an Atlanta perspective, or last night anyway, for sure. June, massive run, 21-6, a historic run for the Braves, back to relevancy. From the college football perspective, a pretty strong weekend, I think might be the best way to put that. I've seen a bunch of social media reaction, and I kind of take it for what it's worth. But I think those who do follow Gamecock recruiting on a daily basis, or fans who are really interested in it, those fans who unfortunately get involved in it personally and feel like they need to help recruit on social media and like and follow and the whole thing. With, again, I mentioned Dante Reno, going to be a junior in high school. I'm pretty sure 16 years old. That to me, that part of it has always kind of creeped me out for sure. But I think Shane Beamer, from a reputation standpoint, and the Gamecock football program is the larger picture thing here, right? It's not just this running back, this linebacker, this quarterback specifically. That is going to be very important. But I think the larger story here is Gamecock football and its relevance and its place in the SEC, which was very much in doubt midway through year number 1 in Shane Beamer's tenure. Very much in doubt at the end of the Will Muschamp era, going to 2-8. And struggling in a lot of ways for years. And good morning to you, Hope, as well, joining us on the YouTube live stream, talking some Gamecock football coming off of the recruiting weekend, the 4th of July, celebrations all over the place, including commitments, notably the first commitment of the class of 2024 in quarterback Dante Reno from up in the Massachusetts area, son of the Yale football coach Tony Reno. Rated high teens that I've seen, 17th, 18th best quarterback in his class going into his junior season. Then it was a running back from Georgia, a bit of a surprise commitment to Carolina. Guy that was thought to maybe be going to Nebraska, and Dontavius Braswell, rated the 16th best running back in the country. And a linebacker from the state of Florida in Jaden Robinson, thought to be a 4-star guy. So right now, Braswell, I think the second highest rated guy in the class. Pup Howard leading the way, another linebacker from Florida. Robinson not far behind at 4th highest rated guys in the class of 2023 for the Gamecocks. But the larger picture deal was, all right, Shane Beamer comes in with a reputation, a guy who ran Steve Spurrier's recruiting operation back in the day, really laid the foundation, if not more than that, for the glory years of the Stephon Gilmores and the Alshon Jeffries and the Jadeveon Clowneys, and Beamer heading out into the sunset back up to Virginia Tech to coach with his dad as Jadeveon Clowney signs back in the day. It's a heck of a way to go out. And Gamecock fans certainly always appreciated it and understood, I think, the moving back on to Blacksburg to coach with his dad, how unique an opportunity that was. But then to come back and do it as a head coach, a first-year head coach, where there are a lot of issues at the end of the Will Muschamp era. A lot of issues all over the place. That's typically how it goes, right? At every major college football. I'm sure in Gainesville, they're saying a whole lot of issues here. Dan Mullen, that's why he lost his job. Who else? Where else am I thinking? I don't know if Vanderbilt thinks the same way. I don't think that's fair. Tennessee. And that's who Shane Beamer will probably always be compared with the most directly. Josh Heupel coming in at the same time. A lot of issues at Tennessee. I think it's very fair to say more issues there in a lot of ways, and varied issues with NCAA stuff at the end of the Jeremy Pruitt era. Sorry, got thrown off track real quick there by national champion Pat Monteith from North Greenville, just letting us all know the Crusaders there, the Satyrs, still national champs. Don't forget, people. Thank you, Pat. Won't forget. Well done, sir. I just picture you. Maybe that's another reason I got a little bit off track. Picture Pat sitting in his ski mask, just checking out all his chains as he's listening to a little UFA this morning, just pondering his place in life as a national champ. Good for you. A guy with still 2 more years of eligibility, I believe, in college baseball. I don't know if does he get 3 as well? Probably does. I think you get pretty much 5 years these days. I think that's still right. I'm trying to do the math, even if you weren't affected necessarily. I think you probably were. I think it's just 5 years for everybody these days. My point for Gamecock football I'm trying to make is Shane Beamer not only had to win games, get good feelings back into the program, both by what he said and by what Gamecock fans got to see on the field, but then also you got to back that up on the recruiting trail. And Dan Mullen knows that better than anybody, right? You can only be perceived as losing recruiting battles for so long, and then an SEC fan base will turn on you real quick. An SEC demanding championship fan base like Florida quicker than others. Even if you had the tremendous reputation coming in, even if you are a proven head coach, wherever you are, even if you're a national championship winning head coach, but you let it slip out there that you're only going to coach 2 or 3 more years, well, then the Sharks come in. But Shane Beamer coming in with the recruiting reputation, with the positive outlook, the strong branding, creating a unique atmosphere around the South Carolina football program that we haven't seen before. Well, that only lasts for so long without results on the field and in recruiting. So when South Carolina was 13th in recruiting a month ago or so, 6 weeks ago or so, that was a massive eyebrow raise for me. Now, trying to keep in mind, recruiting classes, you can never really rank them until several years later after they've already been on campus, for sure. But there is still that stat out there, I think, that no one's won the national championship in the last however many years, maybe in the college football playoff era, without having one of their 4 classes ranked, I think, in the top 5, maybe the top 3 in the country, something like that. You got to get a bunch of dudes in, and you can't hide that, and you can't develop it. You can only develop it to a certain point. You got to have a baseline of talent in your program from an SEC football perspective to have the chance to compete. And I think South Carolina fans know that maybe more than anyone. What do we have? The great line from G.A. Mangus on the show about talking about maybe the expectation or how Shane Beamer runs the program. And if Gamecock fans expect you're just going to get 12 5-stars and 10 4-star guys, you got to cut the gummy in half, I believe was how the quote went. Just trying to describe the challenge of the job, what comes along with it. And South Carolina being a small state and never having an overabundance of big-time football players and how you have to capitalize. And I think maybe one of the latest guys to commit, a good example of that, and the word is that Jaden Robinson, the 4-star linebacker, only got a commitment from, or an offer, I should say, a chance to commit, an offer from the University of Florida Sunday, just a couple of days ago. Happened to be, I think, the same day that he committed to Carolina. And something to keep an eye on is Billy Napier and his staff trying to flip an in-state guy from Lake City. Pretty sure that's the same high school that CJ Spiller went to back in the day. And kind of famously or infamously, if you're from the state of Florida, or I guess a Gator or Florida State Seminole fan, turned down both of those schools and ended up going to Clemson, and obviously it worked out pretty well for him, especially from a college career standpoint. But my overall point for what the Gamecocks have done recently in recruiting, making themselves solid, is how I see it. Up to 7th in the SEC, 26th in the country, 4-star linebackers coming in. You got the class of 2024 first commit and a pretty highly touted quarterback as well. So solidifying, I think, making Gamecock fans feel like the foundation where things have been awfully slippery lately, getting much more secure, and maybe even a blueprint ending up being set now, as much as it can be with the fluidity in college football these days. Solid foundation of players going to continue to come in, maybe more of an identity being formed for certain position groups. Mentioned the linebackers earlier. It has been a position of need, and just I think fair to say, a pretty big weakness from a South Carolina standpoint, where you haven't gotten tremendously talented, nationally touted players in, and guys where you say, hey, man, yep, he's clearly one of the best at his position in the country. Sky Moore was tremendous. The last linebacker to really stand out for me. Ernest Jones, obviously, was really, really good, and now doing it for the LA Rams, but there are so many issues on the Travaris Robinson, Will Muschamp defenses in those last few years. It was hard to see past that and I think appreciate Ernest Jones for being as good as he was. But Clayton White knows what he's doing coaching defense. Proved that in year number 1, I think, is making his resume, his coaching profile. He is becoming a really well thought of prospect for being a head coach in a major way, I think, is how I see his career progression. You don't come to South Carolina as the defensive coordinator without having proven a lot. But having been at Western Kentucky before here, it was a big jump, and Clayton White in year number 1 showed he could handle that, and now getting a couple of recruiting wins, big-time linebackers, I think only upping his stock, certainly upping his appreciation within the Gamecock fan base. And I think improving his reputation outside of that as well. York weighing in on the YouTube live stream with the morning UFA crew. Good morning to you as well, sir. And Chris on Facebook live stream saying, is this recruiting surge from kids wanting to play for Beamer or wanting to play with Rattler? I'm hopeful they want to play for Beamer. Well, the transfer portal surge, I think you can't discount the Rattler effect, especially when you're talking about receivers like Antoine Wells from James Madison and Corey Rucker from Arkansas State, guys who have proven it on a slightly lower level or at smaller schools, but wide receivers who are looking to up their resume and production level and improve their position for the future. Makes sense for them. This recruiting stuff, though, if things go well for South Carolina, none of these recruits are going to play with Spencer Rattler. They're definitely going to play for Shane Beamer, ideally for South Carolina, unless all hits the fan and something goes horribly wrong. So, Chris, the easy answer to that one is the Beamer situation. And I don't even know if it's as much they want to play for him. You can't just have him, right? In this recruiting stuff, you got to have the position guys as the main recruiters for them. So you got to have the connection there. And then it almost like trickles up. And your head coach is always the closer. I think Beamer, a pretty solid guy in that role, seems like. So I would say, and I'd be careful to call it a recruiting surge. I think that's probably, that's might be a fair way to put it, but we also have to keep in mind that that's just where the calendar is as well. That's just what is happening all over the country right now. Commits everywhere. Prospects everywhere are making their decisions now ahead of their high school season. Conditioning in a real way, probably cranking up right now, today in a lot of places. Give kids a little time off. You got prescribed workouts, obviously, and things they need to be doing in the weight room to get stronger, get ready for the season. As far as anything organized, I think it might be today where a lot of programs really hit their summer conditioning or really start ramping up towards preseason practice, which gets going in about a month. And so from that standpoint, I'm just trying to put myself in the position and the thought process of these kids who are making their decisions. Say, all right, I'd love to make it right before we turn the page or you really get going with your senior season. So you have in your mind, okay, off season and things going at a different pace, a slower pace, gives you a little bit more time or clearer head maybe to look at the whole situation, a little bit more time to text and call, and you go on the visits, you go to the camps, whatever you need to do, and then you kind of buckle in and you get rolling. I think that's how most programs and most players prefer to set things up, and that's what we're seeing all over the country. Guys making big decisions. I saw the top offensive lineman, I think, maybe offensive tackle in the country going to Miami. So Mario Cristobal continuing to make moves down in Miami. Not surprising if you know Cristobal's reputation. It's most of the reason he got the job. Most of the reason that fans were ready around that program to move on from Manny Diaz. If you could get a guy in like Mario Cristobal, who they think is a difference maker. Every program, for the most part, thinks that about a guy. That Manny Diaz situation was just fascinating, though, that having been hired at Temple and then Miami snatching him up, and how his dad was the mayor of Miami back in the day. And so there was plenty of storylines and reason to believe that he might be the guy that gets Miami turned back in the right direction. But I think Mario Cristobal, another level, having coached as long as he did at Alabama, taking over at Oregon, success there, and now early recruiting wins. Name, image, and likeness, certainly from the outside looking in, has to be a major factor. It seems to be. The reported deal of $9.5 million from that. There's a quarterback out in California who's already committed to Miami as well. Now you get an offensive lineman. It's impossible not to connect the dots and think there are some strong offers being put out there. Gamecock Athletics putting out their revised and updated version of their website, and then that's connected now to this new Gamecock exchange that makes it even easier, that allows the university to actually be involved in connecting their athletes, their players to businesses. And we'll hear more about that in detail later on this week from Hillary Cox, who's been in charge of pretty much all of that department, I think, for an extended period of time, and we'll can be able to answer any kind of questions. So if you guys have any kind of questions on that, the way that I see it is you can go on the website now and sign up either as an individual or a business and say, hey, I'm interested in connecting directly with Gamecock athletes, paying them for their name, image, and likeness to represent A, B, and C, my business, a certain cause, whatever it is. And then, as I understand it, when you do that, you get hooked up on the website, and then you can go and explore which athletes from which sport, who offers what. You can check out their social media stuff, I believe, and see what might be the best fit. That is a different way to do it. Just talking that out, man. That is 2022 where we are for sure, and what goes into all these conversations. And having Eric Kimmery on the show, who was recruiting for South Carolina this time last year and on Shane Beamer's first staff, obviously, and mentioned that, yeah, it's the first thing. It's the first item on the agenda in recruiting from the player standpoint, for sure. At that point, coach is not technically even allowed to really talk about it. But there's that video of a Texas A&M assistant, I think it is, pointing up to the suite saying there's a lot of money connected up there, and everybody outside of Texas A&M saying, hey, yep, that's you guys. And no, I don't think, Chris, that was $9.5 million per year. Does it really matter? Is it more? It would be more ridiculous. It's ridiculous no matter what to think that a kid in high school would get a $9.5 million offer to go play somewhere in college. $9.5 million per year, and you multiply it by 4 or 5. Yeah, that would be more ridiculous. But still, just the fact that we're talking about it at all. And no, I get visually that I take Chris's comment out, and then a Gamecock recruiting update banner pops up. No, that's not what we're talking about applying to the Gamecocks. That was a Miami deal, a report that's out there. But what we've seen, I think, fair to call it a recruiting surge to a certain degree. What I've seen and what I perceive for the Gamecock football program is bigger than that. It's bigger than, you have to have the details of this quarterback, this offensive lineman, these linebackers signing. But to get back to where Carolina has to be to compete. And again, Will Muschamp had the Gamecocks competing in recruiting and consistently top 25, even better a lot of years. And yet that obviously did not translate to top 25 finishes at the end of seasons. And it does not. It is not an equal comparison, right? Your numbers in recruiting do not end up being your numbers from a production standpoint, but you got to have a bare minimum of guys. You need the right guys, ideally, but first of all, from an SEC standpoint, just to compete at all, just for South Carolina to play its schedule, they got to have a certain number of guys, a bunch of really good players, really talented guys, and you can't fake that in recruiting. You can't be the completely under the radar program. It's all about development and patience and the whole thing. It just is not the formula. South Carolina's got to have some of those guys, but you also have to have instant impact guys. You got to have ultra talented guys that maybe will take a little while longer to make an impact, who ideally they can come in and be down on the depth chart and see how it's done every single day and have a great example by an older player at that position. And then you just keep going. I'm sure that's the blueprint for not just Shane Beamer, but at every place all over the country. Then it's a matter of, all right, you got to get assistant coaches in who can do that. And then who do that exactly how the head coach knows it all fits together. And so I think what I've seen so far, and this is the first full off season now that Shane Beamer and his coaching staff have had with something to show recruits from a product standpoint. This time last year, he had nothing, right? Shane Beamer never been a head coach. Marcus Satterfield never been a major offensive coordinator. Same with Clayton White on the defensive side of the ball. Now you've seen year number 1 going from 2-8 to 7-6. Notable improvement. Signature wins, Florida, Auburn, North Carolina, all on the list. And it seems to really be resonating. And it's not. I saw somebody mention on social media over the weekend, and I apologize across the board if I ever mention your comment and not give you credit. My apologies. I don't mean to do that specifically, but I saw somebody put Will Muschamp, I can sell ice to an Eskimo. That cliche comment that he put in his opening press conference. And then it was Shane Beamer, hold my beer. I think in a lot of ways we're seeing that to a certain degree. I mean, the fact that Will Muschamp felt the need to say that, or would even say that, I think kind of sums him up in a lot of ways. And now we're seeing, I mean, Shane Beamer is a proven recruiter, but you never hear him talking about, I don't think, how good a recruiter he is. It's just I guess that's an odd thing to say, that we've never heard him say that, because you still have to certainly be confident in your abilities and sell that you can do that. Maybe it's more behind closed doors that he's been able to sell that, or maybe the track record's good enough to speak for itself, specifically for South Carolina fans, knowing what he did as an assistant coach back in the Spurrier days. I think has a lot to do with it. But a massive move forward we've seen with South Carolina football recruiting in the last 6 weeks or so, one that was absolutely necessary, I guess, is my point. But again, this is an example for me of Shane Beamer being faced with a challenge, one that's not easy, and one that has lots of moving parts for South Carolina specifically, but meeting that challenge and meeting it in a timely manner. And we might not talk about this enough. And I get it. We've only had 1 year with Shane Beamer in Gamecock football. And beating Florida when South Carolina beat Florida, with where Dan Mullen was at the end of that tenure, beating Auburn in year number 1 with Brian Harsin, which looks like it's a absolute dumpster fire. But then beating North Carolina too. And I get it wasn't a great North Carolina team, but neither was the North Carolina team that South Carolina lost to in the season opener a few years ago with Will Muschamp coaching that thing, and Sam Howell being a true freshman playing in his first ever college game. But Sam Howell on his way out, and North Carolina having done what they did in his career, South Carolina having done what it had done in year number one, playing DeCarry Joyner basically becoming their fourth different starting quarterback in that game, playing with a graduate assistant turned player in Zeb Nolan for a lot of the season, dealing with the Luke Doty injury, putting a guy like Jason Brown up from a St. Francis transfer, dealing with all of that in year number one, and yet still coming through with results. I think similar to what the challenge that South Carolina football will face has faced and will face for a long time until you can get the program running how you want it to run, right? I mean, Clemson faced their own specific issues for a long time too, and then Dabo Swinney, they just got that thing rolling at a certain level where it seems to be at that level, and I don't think none of us saw what came last year coming, what happened last year coming. Like you get it that you've had special guys at the quarterback position, Deshaun Watson, and definitely notable guys. But the DJU thing dropping off, how he did, and like the impact that had on Clemson football, the entire program, and taking kind of the mystique away from it, or the dominance in the ACC. It's hard to fathom. I didn't see it coming. And then you got to give credit to other positions. Maybe it wasn't just the quarterback position that had a drop off in production, and you can't point it all in that direction, but trying to give Clemson credit for how they've had the program running at the tremendous national level for so many years. Also trying to wrap my brain around, well, is it still there? Was last year the anomaly? It certainly seems like it, because the recruiting numbers are where they have been and continue to be. I think 6th in the country right now. So I think most people assume they'll bounce back, but it was so drastic last year. I'm still trying to figure that out, I guess. A lot like I'm still trying to figure out exactly what's going on in the big picture in college football, now having had a few days to soak in the Southern Cal and UCLA Big Ten deal, and to maybe even think about the possibilities out there, how many there are. It's really difficult to think about. When Southern Cal and UCLA can jump from LA to the Big Ten, it's hard for me to say that anything's off the table. And knowing that Fox is really driving the Big Ten right now and competing tooth and nail against ESPN, which is with the SEC, I thought was with the ACC as well, but man, it's hard to see what the ACC can do now to keep pace at all, to be relevant or as relevant as they have been from a conference standpoint. And it really does seem not even super conference is kind of a dumb way to put it. I think you almost just two divisions or two leagues, it seems to be where this thing might end up. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows right now. If you do, and you can let other people know, you will be a legend for sure in the college sports world these days, because the way these teams have kept it under wraps and just been able to make their moves. It would be one thing if it was one school, right? If it was Notre Dame doing it, going from an independent to joining a conference in football, even though they've been a part of the ACC and all the other sports recently, that would be one thing, to keep that under wraps and to keep that quiet and be able to make that kind of stealthy move. But these schools that have done it paired up, the Texas, Oklahoma, and Southern Cal and UCLA thing, that's the tremendously impressive part of this equation for me. And so I think I've only gotten less clear, maybe the more time I've had to think about the Big Ten expansion news. Maybe the less I feel like I know, or the more I realize I don't know, or we don't know. I think that's how big news can be for me a lot of times, where I can hear it at first and I can, in my head, try to logically go from one step to the next, say, okay, I get that, got that. Last year it was, okay, Oklahoma and Texas joined the SEC, massive news, but I don't think that's necessarily going to reshape the entire landscape of college sports like some people were predicting at the time and calling for at the time, speculating. But now that, even though it's been a year later, we've seen two other massive schools make massive moves. It's hard for me not to think, all right, this is going in that direction. Roger weighing in. Will the ACC end up on the level of the AAC or Conference USA even when this is over? Time will tell. I don't think we're going to see that. I think, especially in this, I'm completely biased in this. Having grown up in ACC territory, Greensboro, North Carolina, completely biased in this, but I would have a hard time. I got a hard time believing that a conference with as much tradition and pride as the ACC would allow itself to be watered down to that level. I would just think at some point they would just say, no, we're done. Right? If you are jumping out of our league, if it's so many, I would think that, there's the theory out there that pretty much half the ACC would join the Big Ten, the northern half, right? Or the more basketball centric schools, and then the other half of the ACC, the Clemsons, the Florida States, even Virginia Techs of the world would join the SEC, and that's how the super conferences would move forward. That would maybe be the next line. That to me seems a lot more likely than what you're mentioning there, Roger. Kind of the fizzle pop way to go out of getting poached and then just kind of watering down. I don't see that happening. And again, it's interesting that you put the AAC or Conference USA. You don't mention, I would say the Big 12 would be the much more likely conference it's like. And now the Pac-10-ish, if a couple of teams decide to leave and then you replace them with lower tier teams, that's the trend. Well, that's what happened in the Big 12. I don't know if we can call it a trend yet. We still have to wait to see what happens out west. Still way too many question marks, way too many pieces left in that puzzle. But I don't think we'll see that happening, Roger. Again, from a pride standpoint, I think the ACC has been able to compete outside of football in a major way with the Big Ten and the SEC in enough ways to where it could puff out its chest, and we call them the Power Five. We're not going to be able to do that much longer. I'm going to avoid doing that now that we have the Big Ten and the SEC with 16 schools coming. The balance of power has shifted their way for sure. You can't pretend at the ACC it's otherwise. You just can't. And then so now the question is, all right, what do you do to try to continue to compete? What can you do? Notre Dame, the obvious, easiest way to get a massive feather in the cap and to push up the profile. But again, why would Notre Dame do that now? The ACC's been trying to get Notre Dame forever. Big Ten's trying to get Notre Dame forever. The price is awfully high right now, as high as it will ever be, it seems like to me. So whatever deal these conferences would have to make with Notre Dame doesn't seem like it would. You try not to buy high, right? I'm not an economic expert, but I know that. Buy low and sell high. And if you're Notre Dame, do you feel like you need to do it? I don't know if you know enough. I'm sure those at the very top will end up knowing, all right, what are the college football playoff? Where is it going to go? What needs to happen to make sure Notre Dame is still relevant to that? Because that's what's driving all of this. It's crazy to me that it just comes down to that. The rest of college athletics is shaped by how the college football playoff is designed and how much a school can compete or have the opportunity to compete. And so I think that's how this thing will ultimately play out from a Notre Dame perspective. But it seems to me, based off the track record, that Notre Dame's been pretty much able to write itself into the formula to include that includes them. They've been able to write themselves into the college football playoff formula. And if you can do that, why would you ever join up when it's not, unless it is an offer, a Dustin Johnson-like Live Series offer where it's just too good for your university to turn down. And I don't know if that is a thing at Notre Dame, having their own separate independent deal. Roger says, I'm a Gamecock fan. Vaguely remember them being in the ACC. I hope the ACC does stay relevant. I really do. Yeah, I don't know if we can agree across the board that that's what needs to happen in college football, if that's what's better, healthier for college football. I don't know, because right now it doesn't seem to get us better football games. I'll tell you that right now. Clemson's dominance in that conference over the last decade-ish hasn't gotten us a lot of great ACC games. There are a few that do stand out to me. Clemson and Notre Dame in the rain several years ago. And I know it's probably not even the only one. That's the one that just popped to my brain first. Clemson and Louisville. Who am I thinking of specifically? I think that was Deshaun Watson. Yeah, back in that period, it was a night game, Saturday night game. I forget what game I was coming back from. I think it was South Carolina, Texas A&M earlier that day. Watching that thing at night. But I know Clemson, Florida State have played some tremendous matchups through the years, the last several years not being one of those years. Outside of that, does the ACC have to stay relevant? Is that what we need? Is that what college football needs? And again, I'm all for regional rivalries, especially. Games that have more than just kind of paper meaning. Like Southern Cal and Michigan State, or UCLA and Michigan State. That just seems like a really odd matchup to me that doesn't do much. As opposed to, you got a Stanford Southern Cal or a Stanford UCLA game. All right, that definitely makes a lot more sense in my head. I don't want to see the Washington and the Washington State game or the Oregon State game go away. Those are good for college football. It's part of the fabric, no doubt about it. So I'm not sure. Yeah, Clemson, Louisville, 2016. Troy confirms the best game I've seen in person. Yeah, fantastic. And so there certainly have been some good games, especially from the Gamecock perspective. The ACC gets knocked all the time. There have been a few good games. And I think it's just a matter of, all right, how many good matchups do you get on paper? And then how often do they live up to the bill? In the SEC, you just get, it's just made to have a certain number of really good games on paper from a ranking standpoint, and also then you get some games that just sneak up on you You get some upsets. You get the Texas A&M over Alabama last year, but then you just get some near instant classics. Like the Georgia going up to Notre Dame. That Jake Fromm, his first real game where he kind of steps in on the road as a freshman, I believe, helps Georgia win that game several years ago. Example of a non-conference game. Doesn't have to necessarily be part of the conference structure to be a tremendous college football game. And we've gotten big-time programs to schedule games like that more and more often here recently. So what will the effect be of more conference games or more big-time programs in conferences? That's where I'm not willing to go to straight to the super conference model and say college football, well, it definitely only is destined for this road. I think it can still very much exist. And so I'm with you, Roger, to that degree, that the traditionalist part of me hopes that we do still have the basic structure that we have right now. I think more can be better, more different conferences, as opposed to just saying, no, you got to throw everybody in there, and then you have more continuity there. I can see that, because we all saw it a couple of years ago. It's really difficult for major conferences in college to get on the same page and to move in the same direction. They figured it out, kinda. The Big Ten eventually got on board and played football, but it took a while, and it wasn't pretty, and it was a mess. They worked it out to some degree, varying degrees of success, with the SEC leading the way. So will the future of college football be that on a grander scale, and obviously a better circumstances, not having to deal with the COVID situation? I don't know. I still don't know. This is almost a week later now. We've had the news pop out. So still trying to absorb that, figure that out, and know exactly what that's going to mean, or speculate what it's going to mean. Think about what it's going to mean moving forward. Don't know for sure. Do know. Happy to be with you guys on the day after the 4th of July here. Obviously, tons to talk about still, and we still have a ways to go. It'll be 2 weeks from now, not only the Major League Baseball All-Star Game, but the SEC doing its media days during that time period again this year. So we're about 2 weeks away from SEC media days, where we'll get to hear from players and coaches, and we'll hear some of their thoughts. I'm wondering, as we sit here today, how many more moves, if any, will get done, will happen in the college sports game of chess that Southern Cal and UCLA have been a big part of lately. Do we anticipate? I do. I anticipate more moves now. Maybe that's overreaction to the Southern Cal UCLA news, and we saw last year that we didn't get that next move for Texas and Oklahoma. I mean, it took a year basically to see the next move. But I think we got to get something of substance from the Pac-10-ish, right? How they're going to move forward. And that direction, I think you got to try to figure out that pretty quickly, with 2024 now, the year set for Southern Cal and UCLA to play in the Big Ten, with just 2 seasons now left with them in your conference. So you gotta figure out, are you going to go patchwork? Are you going to go smaller schools? Are you going to go the Big 12 model? Or are those schools still left in the Pac-10-ish? Are they going to be that much? Are they going to be so aggressive? Are they going to be desperate-ish to cut and run, to make these things super conferences? I guess that timeline isn't in the next 2 weeks, but man, it sure feels like you got to get some kind of direction going. How long do you have the doubt and the indecision? And again, I go back to an article I was reading about these Elite 11 quarterbacks. And one of them specifically originally had committed to Oklahoma to play for Lincoln Riley. Lincoln Riley moves to Southern Cal, changed the commitment, right? So in this kid's head, he was originally going to play in the Big 12. Then it was in the Pac-10-ish. And now he's going to be a guy that plays in the Big 10. Crazy. This guy's changed 3 different conferences. And he just was attached to one coach who's switched schools once. And how much, if anything, I think the word is out there that Lincoln Riley knew nothing about this, which I can believe with the lack of chatter, the lack of speculation, the lack of rumor, the lack of whispers. They weren't there. I think the only way you can keep that from happening is keeping it under wraps and not even telling a guy that you just paid a ton of money and stole from Oklahoma that this is going to be the plan. Because I know it has an impact, a massive impact too, on the football programs for UCLA and Southern Cal, but on a day-to-day X's and O's situation, those coaches didn't have to know. They didn't have to be in the loop. You might slightly alter. You are going to alter your recruiting, your programs. Your programs will be affected for sure, but it was nothing that was going to be a massive impact that they absolutely had to know about ahead of time. So I can see, I can buy that. No, those Lincoln Riley didn't know. That wasn't part of the sales pitch that, hey, come to Southern Cal because we're going to be moving to the Big Ten. I would find that hard to believe. Maybe some of you out there might be even more skeptical than me and say, no, that he had to know something. I think at least the public story is now that, nope, he didn't know anything. And that makes sense. That would be the public story. Because otherwise, then it's a matter of credibility, right? How did you know about this? And you didn't mention it to us, or you were keeping this under your hat, or the whole thing. Roger back in saying, I guess the key may be, do they stop at 16, 20, 24, 32 if they do go to the super conference model? And that's what we have no idea, right? We have no idea. And then, so if you don't even know where that would end, how can you know like what would be best? Like we can't figure out, most of us can't agree on what would be the best college football playoff number, right? 4 teams, 8, 6, 12, what is it? I think all of us have our own number. Mine's the more, the better. 12, I'm good with 12. Let's do it. The devaluing the regular season and the whole thing, I don't get it, man. Competitors compete. Football is such a condensed season compared to other sports. You're not getting what you see in the NBA. You're not getting load management in college football. And then, in the NFL, I get it. Week 16 or 17 now, game 16 or 17. A lot of times the starters do sit if you're guaranteed in the playoffs or you got your home field advantage or whatever it is. But we've seen varying success and different coaches have different strategies in that. So I don't see that becoming a main problem. And if it does become a problem in college football, I think that 12-team playoff would be worth it. You get one run from even team number 8 in that 12-team playoff. Then I guess you would argue, well, why not just have 8? Or team number 9 or above, you get one of those teams to go on and win the national championship. I think that just makes the sport more interesting, especially as opposed to what we've gotten in the last several years. DC says that's total BS. Lincoln Riley wasn't part of the decision making, but he knew what was happening. Okay, if you say so. I don't know. I think a lot of us from the outside looking in make things more complicated than they need to be sometimes. And being around a Steve Spurrier, a Lou Holtz, or a Dabo Sweeney, being in the rooms with Will Muschamp, and especially after games with these coaches, I always like to go in the visiting press conference, the Mark Richt press conference, the Phil Fulmer ones, being around those guys after these games. I'll never forget, it was Rich Brooks from Kentucky. I don't remember the year exactly. It was towards the end of his career, but being a TV camera nerd, going to get the coach's shot. And I had somebody else I worked with there at WOLO TV getting the Gamecocks post-game press conference. But most TV stations, for whatever reason, probably just a staffing deal, never got the visiting teams post-game press conference. And I always thought that's a lot of times where you get the more honest comments about the team that wins comes from the loser typically, as opposed to the team that wins does the old fake humility thing, or doesn't want to come off as classless, non-sportsman like. And so they usually say the same thing, like the other team was well coached and the whole thing, and it was a really tough challenge, but proud of our guys. We came together, and the usual cliches. But it's the team that loses most of the time that you get more honesty. But the real honesty comes not in front of those podiums, but a lot of times in the conversations on the way there, or what's said on the sideline. And I just remember, I don't even think I had the camera on him necessarily, but I'd gotten the old post-game handshake, was headed that way. And maybe Brooks knew he didn't have necessarily a microphone in front of his face, but I think was saying to either one of his coaches, but I would imagine it was an administrator or maybe even a big-time Kentucky booster, like, hey, yeah, if our quarterback wouldn't have got hurt, we would have won this game. And that one always stuck with me. At the time, it was sour grapes, I felt like, for sure. But I bring this up just simply to say, man, I know we see these guys on TV. We see how much money they're making. We understand that they are CEOs of corporations for the most part. But also, these guys are competitors. And I would say mainly that's what they are. And competition, for the most part, is pretty simple. And I think the longer I've been around it, the more I've appreciated, and the more I think guys who are ultimate competitors are able to keep it simple, able to think about it that way, or might just be the best at it. Just to break it down simply, if we had our quarterback, if he hadn't gotten hurt, we would win this game. So many other factors, right? And at the time, again, I'll never forget hearing that and thinking, I don't think so, man. I don't know. I understand you have to believe that, but from what I saw in this game, that wasn't happening. So I mentioned all that to say that I'm not convinced it's total BS that there was some kind of master plan he was let in on, because even though you are the guy when you're the head football coach, you're still hired by somebody else. There's still administration in place. There are still things above the pay grade, even though I hate that phrase. That's just reality. And so I think it would take a ton of trust to let that news get known ahead of time and put your coach really in that situation. And that's what it would have been. That's another way to look at it, right? You're almost insulating, protecting your guy by not letting them in on that. So he can come out and say, with a degree of credibility, nope, didn't know about it. Because, media nerds feel like, and fans feel almost betrayed. Like, hey, how did you not know? How did you not tell us? Why didn't we get a heads up on this? This is out of nowhere. And then I think I felt in those rooms, a lot of times those guys do give the honest, like, yeah, we didn't know either, man. Same with us. And maybe they're just ultra good salesmen and $1 million, and now it's, 8-figure guys. Maybe they're 8-figure guys for that reason, and I just don't see through that, and I'm a little too naive. But the feel I've always gotten from those guys is that I think that their bosses put them in those positions and understood that they needed to keep them in those positions to be able to say that with credibility. And I think college football coaches have been at the top of the list a lot of times, unfortunately, at knowing what they don't need to know, what they can't know, what they better not know. If that makes any sense to you. Like, hey, assistant coach, we need to get this recruit. Tell me how I can help you. And then you go get it done. And I don't need to know the details. Really, that's the way that major college football programs have run for decades, for a long, long time. And only the really dumb ones have gotten caught a lot of times at what exactly has happened, breaking the rules to get those things done. So I kind of see that in this case as well, but maybe not. But again, because of the lack of rumor and speculation and circulation of what could happen, that's why I throw that theory out there. That's just me, though. Love how you guys pop in your comments here and talking a lot of Gamecock recruiting this morning. Gamecock football that will continue to dominate our conversation in the next 6+ months, right? I guess that math doesn't quite work out, does it? Yeah, maybe close. 6+ months would get us, I think, about to the national championship game. Not that I'm saying South Carolina's going to be part of that. I'm just saying the college football season will be going for about that long now. So maybe that math does work out. The specific recruiting notes over the weekend, in case you were completely wrapped up in the 4th of July festivities, then good for you. I don't even know if there are people that do that anymore, right? With our phones. It's really difficult to be completely immersed in almost anything unless you're just making a point to do it. But for the class of 2023, this year, let's separate it from that standpoint. It was surprising news from a 4-star running back out of the state of Georgia, rated the 16th best running back in the country by On3 is what I'm looking at, connected to Gamecock Central. Dontavius Braswell is his name, and rated the second highest guy now in Shane Beamer's recruiting class, his second recruiting class, first full recruiting class, I think is probably how we'll refer to it. But Dontavius Braswell, a bit of a surprise over the weekend, a guy that didn't have necessarily a heavy favorite out there. Nebraska, I think, favored the highest percentage chance of what I was reading. Louisville, Boston College, Florida State, all in the mix, and he ends up choosing South Carolina. And then Jaden Robinson, another 4-star guy, a linebacker from Lake City, Florida, choosing the Gamecocks as well. The number I saw on him, 35th ranked linebacker in the country. I think he's the 4th highest rated recruit in the class of 2023. That is 26th in the country for the Gamecocks, 7th in the SEC right now. And again, take those numbers for what they're worth, but I think just trying to give you some kind of perspective. So those happened for the class of 2023. National TV, CBS Sports, Dante Reno, class of 2024 quarterback that committed to Carolina. I think that was Saturday night, Friday night. I don't know. The extended weekend has me all messed up. But about to start his junior season of high school, a guy whose dad coaches Yale football. And so that explains, if you saw him pick up the hat with the Y on it and then put it down and kind of look over to his dad, that was their inside joke, right? That he was going to go play for his dad at Yale when he's getting recruited by slightly larger programs. But Dante Reno, now the first commit for the class of 2024, and a guy that's from New England, Massachusetts, and played in Connecticut at a prep school, I think, last year. Will be interesting to follow his development for sure, and now to see how the rest of it goes. We've seen a few examples of this, guys who committed relatively early in the process. I don't know if we've seen a guy commit quite this early from the quarterback perspective in a while, especially with this high of ranking. Maybe Steven Garcia did, but I was thinking he did it after his junior year, not before. Trying to go back through the mental Rolodex real quick. I don't think we've seen a South Carolina quarterback commit this early in a long time. I'm going to have to go back and check that. You guys help me out if you know of anyone off the top of your head. Again, and especially with the way the transfer portal is now, name, image, and likeness, this is going to be less and less prevalent, I think, in major college football from big-time prospects committing before their junior season. Like, I get it. They're baseball guys out there that commit really early. You know, the baseball commitment is always kind of like, I feel, insurance for the big-time prospects. A guy who would be rated, right, okay, the equivalent of the 18th ranked quarterback in the country would be the 18th ranked pitcher, right, in the country in high school. So for those guys, I feel like it's always an insurance policy to commit to a college baseball program when most of the time it's definitely become less and less of a lock that a high school guy is going to get drafted really high and automatically go to pro ball. I think it's college baseball has the best chance to compete with that and lure them away and bring them into college football than it ever has, or college baseball, I should say. So baseball has always been more of an insurance policy when guys do it. I think that's the sport they commit the earliest. That happens, I think, pretty frequently. Guys do it before their junior year. But again, the likelihood of that happening that much later and even going to college baseball at all is just a different animal than college football. So notable in a lot of ways. I know Gamecock fans pretty pleased right now with Shane Beamer, I think, and the recruiting job that is being done. More to be done for sure. And now I think there's also the part of it that fans get to feel a part of it or watch it more on social media with guys, both commits and current players, being more active and being able to be active on social media and fans being able to know, okay, exactly who is being targeted out there and what exactly when the timeline might be a part of that. It's a little bit easier to fall narrowed down to follow, a little more narrowed down now that you have as many prospects in the fold as you do. And again, 13 commits right now that are in for South Carolina football. They're up to 26th in the country, 7th in the SEC. And just to keep the numbers in perspective, like Texas Tech has 23 guys committed in their class. They're up at 18. And Florida State at number 23 just has 9. There are a couple of others out there with 9. Florida, Oregon, and Florida's up at 14. Wow. Surprised to see that, especially with the heat that Billy Napier has gotten recently. Tennessee's up at 13. Arkansas is at 12. And again, South Carolina's 7th in the SEC. So LSU, Georgia's at 5, Alabama's at 4, just in case you wanted the specifics there. Clemson at 6. So bare minimum, what you got to have, baseline when you're the head coach at South Carolina, you got to be top 25-ish in recruiting at least, because nearly everybody you're competing with is already up there. Chris asks, how much better would college baseball be if they had to play 3 years in college before going pro like football? I see what you're saying. It would be amazingly better. He answers his own question. Yeah, but it has gotten amazingly better because of the resources invested in college programs, because of how much more competitive guys like Ray Tanner ended up becoming in these conversations to guys like Drew Meyer back in the day. Like, hey, yeah, you can go. You can become a professional at 18 years old, but there are other things that come with that the next 3 years of your life, you're it's going to be a vastly different experience for you. And the college experience is valuable, maybe a different kind of value. And when you get up to being Gavin Floyd numbers and $4 million, you got to say, hey, man, you got to go take that money. But I mean, again, Chris, the show's called Unrestricted Free Agent. So I love that players get to make that decision. In football, I get it. It's a different type of game, environment, and the conversation would not even, it's just not even the same conversation, right? How many 18-year-old kids can go play in the NFL every year? I think 5, a dozen would be, I think, way too many. Jadeveon Clowney was that guy. Ellis Johnson told us, right? This guy physically, he could go play in the NFL now. Jadeveon Clowney was a freak, a generational freak. Maurice Clarett, awful situation back in the day, right? Marcus Lattimore, another Gamecock, obviously could have played in the NFL. So I would love that those guys would have the opportunity, but the NFL makes its rules and they use college football clearly as their minor leagues. We as college football fans get to enjoy that, so I don't want to complain about it too much. But I would never want to change that for baseball because it would limit the opportunities that kids have to go make money when they're worth it. And then we do see a lot of young guys having a major impact in Major League Baseball. No pun intended there. So from the Gamecock recruiting standpoint, improved in a notable weekend for sure. I think Gamecock fans, while they're waving the American flag, also waving their Gamecock flags, feeling good about things. And there's plenty of reason to. It's one thing if you get offensive linemen or even defensive linemen. Maybe you pluck a safety somewhere or something. I feel like those are harder guys to rally around. Just don't quite have the impact, the familiarity with fans as opposed to quarterbacks. Blue chip linebackers are pretty good, especially for an SEC program that knows it needs to have a really good defense, but running back as well. And then when you get one that's a bit of a surprise, it makes sense that Gamecock fans are feeling good about where recruiting is heading, where the football program is heading. And on July 5th, it is a welcome storyline in a lot of ways for South Carolina fans that haven't been able to feel that in the last several years. I mean, could feel it to some degree last year, but it was a lot of transition and a lot of question marks with Shane Beamer coming in as a first-year head coach. And there was clearly a lot that needed to be done to improve a team that had struggled winning 6 games combined the last 2 years. But now things are different for sure. And there is positive momentum and optimism, I think, has returned to Columbia, to Gamecock fans. Maybe not to the level that we saw it at in the Steve Spurrier years, but something close to that, just to even bring it up at all, I think is a welcome transition for sure for Gamecock fans, a much needed one. Still, I get it if you're a Clemson fan out there and you're listening, you're shaking your head like, no, these people are delusional. I get that. If you're a Georgia fan, I get that. You guys are in a different place. But to be headed in the positive direction and to have some tangible things to go off of, to have tangible wins against notable programs like Florida and Auburn and North Carolina last year, having seen that bowl game the last time South Carolina football played, having a young head coach rolling into year number 2 and getting guys with some solid credentials, solid high school prospects, and continuing to build on that. It's building in the positive direction. I hope the show built in a positive direction. I don't know if that happened or not. I'm not sure that was necessarily the goal, but that would be the preferred way to go, to build it up in the positive direction. I do know that I'm thankful for you being a part of it. Appreciate all your comments, especially DC, Chris, Roger. You guys are some of the more recent ones. I know Troy and York, Pat, Hope. Thank you guys for hopping in this morning and joining us live. We're doing it every morning from 8 until 10. The rest of this week for sure. Then I think we're going to have a week off of the program, the old family beach trip. I'm not going to try to shoehorn in a show working in spring rotation or compromise rotation with kids all over the place doing that. So we got Wednesday, Thursday, Friday this week. We're going to get some good guests in here for you. I know, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, we've got Gamecock set up from the University of South Carolina in charge of that name into the likeness stuff, and then the new portal that's all set up. We get all the details going for that. Who knows who else might pop in? Appreciate you guys popping in, listening, watching, however you did it today. YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, where you can always watch. Podbean is where you can always listen live, and then the podcast platform at any time, all over the place. As soon as we're done from 8 until 10, and that will do it for today. The July 5th, 2022 edition of Tim Hill, Unrestricted Free Agent.